Listen carefully, because if you think Iran says its missiles are non-negotiable is just another hardline quote, you're already late. This isn't a mood, it's a mechanism. When a state publicly declares a weapons capability non-negotiable, that's not diplomacy. That's architecture. It's the moment the system tells you which wall is load-bearing, meaning if anyone tries to remove it, the building doesn't renovate. It collapses, or it explodes outward. And here's the claim that sounds extreme until you see the pattern. The next phase won't be decided by speeches. It will be decided by math, debt math, deterrence math, credibility math, and the shrinking room for error inside a leveraged global economy. Anchor it in reality. The IMF has put total global debt around $251 trillion, over 235% of world GDP. That's not trivia. That's a pressure gauge. In a world that levered, every shock travels faster. Oil, shipping insurance, inflation expectations, rates, currency flows, sovereign spreads. Now hold that thought, because in a moment I'm going to show you the single reason missiles become non-negotiable, and why trying to negotiate them often makes the situation worse, not better. But first, understand this. Now what? It's not primarily a Middle East question. It's a system question. Because once a country believes its core deterrent is the only thing standing between it and regime-level vulnerability, that deterrent stops being a policy tool. It becomes a survival organ. And no state voluntarily donates a survival organ to an opponent's goodwill. So if missiles are non-negotiable, what does the machine do next? It follows a predictable sequence. Not every time perfectly, but often enough that you can treat it like a cycle. And I want you to lock this in because it's the whole video. There are 4 stages. First, an order forms. Treaties, alliances, financial rules, a sanctions architecture, a security umbrella. It creates expectations, it creates dependency, it creates winners and losers. Second, expansion and overextension. The order spreads, enforcement gets heavier, commitments multiply. Meanwhile, the targeted side adapts asymmetrically. Proxies, domestic mobilization, alternative trade routes, gray markets, parallel finance, indigenous weapons programs. Costs rise, trust falls. Every defensive move gets read as offensive intent. Third, crisis and loss of control. Not always one big explosion, often a chain of smaller crises. Commodity shocks, proxy strikes, political deadlines, leadership incentives, legitimacy stress. This is where flexibility dies. Leaders stop optimizing for prosperity and start optimizing for survival. Fourth, the lock. Deterrence hardens. Red lines go public. Negotiation narrows to what leaders can sell domestically without looking like surrender. Pressure doesn't soften positions. It clarifies what's sacred. And then the system tests credibility. Now here's the part most people miss. You don't argue with stage 4. Stage 4 is what happens when stage 1, 2, and 3 already removed the space for compromise. So we test the machine through history. 3 eras, different flags, same gears. If it repeats, you're not watching coincidence, you're watching structure. First case, the interwar period. Stage 1, after World War I, a new order forms through treaties and enforcement frameworks. Versailles in 1919, plus a broader settlement that tried to freeze outcomes into permanent constraints. It was supposed to create stability. It also created humiliation, resentment, and an enforcement problem. The rules depended on political will more than permanent capability. Stage 2, expansion and overextension. The settlement demanded long-term compliance from a country that didn't accept the legitimacy of permanent weakness. The enforcing powers were divided and exhausted, trying to hold a European perimeter while their own publics wanted peace at any cost. Stage 3, crisis. Hyperinflation hits Germany in the early 1920s. Then the Great Depression arrives in 1929 and detonates unemployment, bank failures, and political extremism. Under compression, compromise becomes politically deadly. Leaders who look weak get replaced by leaders who promise strength. Stage 4, the lock. Rearmament becomes existential, not optional. Every demand to reverse it is interpreted as an attempt to restore permanent vulnerability. Diplomacy narrows. Agreements are tested, then broken. Red lines form on all sides. And eventually the system produces war, not because one speech did it, but because the architecture hardened into a lock. That's not just history, that's the mechanism. When a state believes the order is designed to keep it weak, it eventually treats rearmament as sacred. Now, second case, money, credibility, and why markets should care. Stage 1. After World War II, Bretton Woods creates a monetary order, currencies linked to the dollar linked to gold, plus USEC security guarantees, and post-war institutional legitimacy. For a time, it works because the US has industrial dominance and political cohesion. Stage 2, expansion and overextension. Global commitments grow. Costs rise. Foreign central banks accumulate dollars. More claims exist against U.S. gold. The system's promise strains under its own success. The world needs dollars, but the dollars are supposed to be convertible to gold. Stage 3, crisis. By the late 1960s, the contradiction becomes unmanageable. In 1971, the U.S. ends convertibility, the Nixon shock. The anchor breaks. Stage 4, the lock. Once credibility breaks, the world doesn't politely return to the old equilibrium. It scrambles for a new one. The 1970s bring oil shocks, inflation, stagflation, political hardening. The lesson: when financial credibility weakens, geopolitics becomes more coercive, not less, because the cushion disappears. Leaders lose room to maneuver, domestic tolerance shrinks, everything becomes a credibility test. Now, third case, Soviet overreach. Stage 1, a bipolar order forms. NATO versus Warsaw Pact, nuclear deterrence, spheres of influence. Stage 2, overextension. The Soviet system spends massively to maintain parity while its economy stagnates. The perimeter is expensive. Strategic commitments pile up. Stage 3, crisis. Afghanistan becomes a grinding war after 1979. Internal weakness deepens. Political sclerosis spreads. Costs become unsustainable. Stage 4, lock and collapse. Under strain, leadership hardens on security essentials because it cannot afford to look weak. But hardening increases costs. Costs accelerate failure. The system breaks by 1991. Different stories, same gears. Under structural pressure, states cling harder to what they think keeps them alive. They don't trade it away gracefully. Now compress those cases into one rule you can use today. When an order expands until it exceeds tolerance, crisis removes flexibility, and pressured actors treat deterrence as sacred. Negotiations narrow, risk rises. The system tests credibility. That is the machine. Now apply it to Iran, step by step. Cold, mathematical. Stage 1, foundation. Today's foundation is a sanctions and alliance order layered over a dollar-centric financial system. That system offers enormous leverage through finance, technology controls, and security posture. Meanwhile, the Middle East environment has evolved. Drones, precision missiles, proxies, cyber operations, maritime choke points, escalation pathways that can move faster than diplomacy. And now the trigger. Renewed diplomatic efforts are discussed. Indirect talks are reported. And pressure exists, especially from some U.S. allies, to expand negotiations beyond the nuclear file. Iran draws a line. Missiles are not on the table. That is not a throwaway sentence. That is Iran pointing at the load-bearing wall. Stage 1 is in place. Check. Stage 2, expansion and overextension. On one side, the U.S. and partners attempt to sustain a wide security perimeter, deterring Iran, protecting shipping routes, backing allies, preventing nuclear proliferation, and managing multiple flashpoints at once. On the other side, Iran invests in asymmetric deterrence, ballistic missiles, drones, and regional networks, because conventional parity is out of reach under sanctions and restrictions. Now here is the single reason I promised earlier. This is the retention hinge. Missiles are the cheapest, domestically producible substitute for the kind of air force and navy that sanctions are designed to prevent. If you can't import advanced aircraft reliably, you build what you can build. Missiles, drones, dispersion. So from Iran's perspective, missiles aren't extra. They are the spine. And here's the part that flips the whole negotiation logic. If missiles are the spine, then negotiating missiles is not like negotiating a policy. It is like negotiating a skeleton. That's why the line is non-negotiable. Not because Iran loves missiles, because Iran believes removing them creates vulnerability that cannot be fixed quickly. Now add the pressure amplifier, the global financial condition. In a world with debt levels this high, escalation risk transmits into inflation and rates faster. That's why markets watch this region like a heartbeat monitor. Stage 2 is active. Commitments collide with fatigue, pressure collides with fragility, the room for creative compromise shrinks, verified. Stage 3, crisis and loss of control. Crisis doesn't mean war tomorrow. Crisis means flexibility dies. It means leaders negotiate under domestic political constraints and credibility pressure. Every concession looks like weakness. Every delay looks like deception. The acceptable deal space gets smaller, and right now the pressure is obvious. Allies push to include missiles. Iran refuses. U.S. politics signals mixed incentives. Keep talks alive, but don't be seen as conceding. That's a compression chamber. And here's the dangerous feedback loop. For Iran, giving up missiles looks like removing the deterrent they believe prevents coercion or attack. For U.S. and Israeli strategists, leaving missiles untouched looks like validating a growing threat. Those fears are not symmetrical, but they are mutually reinforcing. That's the security dilemma. Each side's defense is read as the other side's offense. Stage 3 is present, undeniable. Now, stage 4, the lock. If missiles are non-negotiable, the most likely near-term outcome is not a clean resolution. It is a relocation of pressure, because if you can't move the wall, you attack what surrounds it: sanctions enforcement, maritime pressure, covert operations, cyber, proxy theaters, targeted economic moves, diplomatic isolation, regional alignment changes. So now what becomes a forecast? The machine tries one of three pathways, and all three raise volatility. Pathway 1, a narrow agreement focused on the nuclear file, with missiles outside the deal. This can reduce immediate tail risk for a while, but missiles remain a permanent friction point that returns in every future crisis. So you get temporary calm with medium-term fragility, the risk premium dips, then rebuilds. Pathway 2, talk stall. Pressure escalates. Iran responds with deterrence, signaling an asymmetric moves. This is talks while escalating. It's the most common pattern when red lines are public. Miscalculation risk rises, shipping risk reprices, energy volatility returns. Pathway 3, a crisis event forces decisions. A maritime incident, a proxy strike with large casualties, a domestic political shock, a leak that makes leaders look cornered. Something triggers a credibility test, and in credibility tests, leaders are incentivized to overreact rather than underreact, because the political cost of looking weak is immediate, while the cost of escalation can be delayed and blamed. That's not moral judgment. That's political arithmetic. Now I want to hit you with one question, because it changes how you interpret every headline from here. If missiles are non-negotiable, what is Iran actually saying about time? It is saying, we do not believe the future gets safer if we give this up. It is saying, we do not trust that concessions reduce vulnerability. It is saying, our internal survival logic is aligned around deterrence, and that is why pressure tends to harden the position instead of softening it. Now switch lenses, because your viewer is not only watching geopolitics, they're watching their life, prices, markets, jobs, currency, savings. So how does the market machine translate this geopolitical machine? Simple. It shifts the probability distribution. Even if managed tension remains the base case, the tail risk fattens. And when tail risk fattens around energy and shipping choke points, you see the same sequence. Oil volatility rises, defense narratives rise, safe haven demand rises, emerging market pressure rises. Global risk appetite declines at the margin. And this matters more in a high debt world because the shock absorbers are thinner. Elevated debt means higher sensitivity to rates and inflation expectations. This is why a missiles are non-negotiable headline can move markets without a single shot fired. Because the message is, bargaining space is narrower than it looks. And narrow bargaining space makes accidents expensive. Now we do the cold confirmation. Watch how cleanly it fits. Foundation, sanctions and alliance order plus dollar-centric leverage in a region with rapid escalation tech. Check. Expansion and overextension. Enforcement widens. Commitments multiply. Adversaries adapt asymmetrically. And global leverage limits tolerance for shocks. Verified. Crisis, loss of control. Talks occur amid heightened stakes. Missile demands collide with refusal and flexibility shrinks. Undeniable. Lock, deterrence hardens. Negotiation narrows. Pressure relocates to shadow domains. Volatility rises. That is the historical pattern repeating. Now, what do you do with this? Here's the final warning. Do not fall for this time is different. People will say American exceptionalism guarantees control. But exceptionalism does not repeal constraints. It does not erase debt sensitivity. It does not eliminate geopolitical backlash. People will say modern economics is too advanced for oil shocks and inflation spirals. But sophistication does not create energy supply. It does not eliminate shipping risk. It does not stop repricing when tail risk expands. People will say technology will save us. But technology doesn't negotiate. It accelerates escalation pathways. Drones, missiles, cyber, information war. Technology amplifies conflict speed as much as it amplifies productivity. So here's the practical takeaway. 3 actions you can actually use. 1, stop consuming headlines as isolated drama. Consume them as stage indicators. When a state calls a capability non-negotiable, you are seeing stage 4 behavior emerging from stage 3 pressure. That means volatility risk rises even if war does not. 2, watch the substitute pressure channels. If missiles are off the table, expect intensified movement in sanctions enforcement, maritime posture, proxies, and cyber activity. Those are the levers that get pulled when the main lever is locked. 3, in markets and personal finance, don't bet on a single outcome. Position for distribution shifts. Respect liquidity, respect diversification, and understand that in a leveraged world, geopolitical shocks can hit inflation and rates faster than intuition expects. And here's the most important point. Don't outsource your understanding to people selling certainty. The machine doesn't reward certainty. It rewards preparedness. Because Now what is? Now the system tests credibility, and systems rarely test credibility gently. So if you want the next piece, the part most people never learn, here's what you do. In the next video, I'm going to show you how the machine was built, how sanctions, debt, and deterrence fused into one structure, and why that structure produces predictable market stress signals before the headlines catch up. Subscribe, watch the next episode, and do not wait for the crisis to teach you what the pattern already told you, because the next stage isn't hidden, it's already forming.